One movie, one controversy, and suddenly Europe was arguing all over again. A fictional thriller about a man seeking revenge after a horrific crime became one of the most talked about films of the year. Politicians weighed in, journalists criticized it, social media exploded with debates. Some people called it a courageous film that dared to ask difficult questions. Others accused it of fueling fear and division. But here's the strange part: the biggest story wasn't what happened inside the movie, it was what happened because of the movie. Why did one fictional film become the center of a debate about immigration, refugees, crime, free speech, and even democracy? Was it exposing uncomfortable realities or simply reflecting the political divisions that already existed? Today, we are unpacking the controversy behind Citizen Vigilante, separating the film's fictional story from real world events, and exploring why it sparked one of Europe's most heated public conversations. Because understanding this movie isn't just about cinema, it is about understanding Europe in the 2020s. At its core, Citizen Vigilante is a revenge thriller. The story follows an ordinary man whose life is shattered after a violent crime. Feeling abandoned by the justice system, he decides to take matters into his own hands and hunt down those he believes are responsible. That basic premise isn't unusual. Hollywood has produced vigilante films for decades. Movies like Death Wish explored similar themes, asking what happens when ordinary citizens lose faith in the institutions meant to protect them. So why did Citizen Vigilante become so controversial? Because this wasn't just another action movie. Its story unfolds against the backdrop of Europe's immigration debate. The film's creators have said they drew inspiration from real criminal cases reported in Germany. However, it's important to understand that Citizen Vigilante is not a documentary. It is a fictional story that uses real-world events as inspiration, combining fact and fiction to create a dramatic narrative. That distinction is crucial. Supporters see the film as raising difficult questions that deserve discussion. Critics argue that it risks oversimplifying a complex issue by focusing on crimes connected to migrants while leaving out the broader context. Those two interpretations define almost every conversation surrounding the film. The director, Uwe Boll, is no stranger to controversy. Throughout his career, Boll has built a reputation for making provocative films that often challenge audiences and generate intense public reactions. Whether people admire his work or dislike it, one thing is difficult to deny: he understands how to spark conversation. Adding even more attention was the casting of Armie Hammer in the lead role. After years away from major Hollywood productions following personal controversies, Hammer's return immediately attracted media coverage. Even before audiences watched the first scene, the film had already become headline news. But the biggest controversy was still to come. If you searched online when the movie was released, you probably saw dramatic headlines claiming that Germany had banned Citizen Vigilante. That claim spread rapidly across social media. But the reality is more nuanced. The film faced significant challenges related to age classification and theatrical distribution in Germany, leading many commentators to describe the situation as censorship. Others argued that the issue involved established film classification procedures rather than a government ban in the literal sense. Those details may sound technical, but they matter. Words like banned carry enormous emotional weight. And in today's social media environment, simplified headlines often travel much faster than complicated explanations. Ironically, the controversy gave the film something no marketing campaign could have brought. People who had never heard of Citizen Vigilante suddenly wanted to know why everyone was talking about it. Supporters argued that authorities were trying to suppress an uncomfortable conversation. Critics argued that public concern centered on the film's potential social impact rather than its political message. The disagreement wasn't only about one movie anymore. It had become a debate about freedom of expression itself. Here is something many discussants miss. Citizen Vigilante didn't create Europe's immigration debate. It entered one that had already been growing for years, long before the movie was written. Europe was wrestling with difficult questions. How many refugees could countries realistically support? How should governments balance humanitarian responsibility with border security? What happens when integration succeeds? And what happens when it doesn't? These weren't hypothetical questions. They were being debated in parliaments, discussed in neighborhoods, and decided in elections across the continent. The movie simply gave those conversations a new focal point. To understand why millions of people reacted so differently to the same film, we need to step away from the cinema for a moment, because the real story begins not in a movie theater, but in 2015. A year that changed Europe forever. And without understanding what happened then, it is impossible to understand why Citizen Vigilante became one of the most controversial films of recent years. The year was 2015. Civil war in Syria had already forced millions from their homes. Conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan continued. Libya had become a major transit route for people trying to reach Europe. Families crossed deserts, boarded overcrowded boats, and risked everything for the hope of safety. The images shocked the world. Children rescued from the Mediterranean. Refugee camps overflowing. Thousands arriving at railway stations across Europe. Many European governments responded by accepting people seeking protection under international refugee law. Germany became one of the largest destinations, with then Chancellor Angela Merkel declaring that the country could meet the humanitarian challenge. To many, it was an act of compassion. To others, it was a political gamble whose consequences had not been fully considered. But before we go further, there is an important distinction that often disappears in online debates. Not everyone arriving in Europe belongs to the same legal category. A refugee is someone fleeing war or persecution and seeking international protection. An asylum seeker is someone waiting for a decision on that claim. A migrant may move for many reasons, including work, education, or family. These terms are frequently used interchangeably, but legally they are not the same. As Europe welcomed new arrivals, governments faced enormous challenges: housing, healthcare, education, employment, language training, integration. Some communities adapted successfully. Across Europe, many refugees built new lives, started businesses, joined local workforces, attended universities, and became active members of society. But integration wasn't equally successful everywhere. Some cities struggled with housing shortages. Public services came under increasing pressure. In certain areas, concerns over crime and social cohesion became part of national political debates. Several high-profile incidents intensified those concerns. The New Year's Eve assaults in Cologne, terrorist attacks in Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Nice, and other cities. Gang violence that received widespread media attention in parts of Sweden. These events had different causes, different perpetrators, and different circumstances, but together they changed public perception. Many citizens began asking difficult questions. Were border systems working effectively? Could governments distinguish genuine refugees from security risks? Were integration policies keeping pace with the scale of migration? Others warned against drawing sweeping conclusions from individual crimes. They pointed out that millions of refugees had committed no crimes at all, and that blaming entire communities for the actions of individuals was both inaccurate and unjust. And this is exactly where Europe became deeply divided. One side believed governments were not addressing legitimate public concerns forcefully enough. The other feared that isolated but shocking incidents were being used to unfairly portray migrants and refugees as a whole. Social media amplified both narratives. Videos spread faster than verified context. Headlines traveled faster than detailed investigations. Algorithms rewarded outrage. Nuance often disappeared. Into this already polarized environment arrived Citizen Vigilante. Supporters argued that the film gave voice to concerns they believed had been ignored for too long. To them, it wasn't simply an action thriller. It reflected anxieties about crime, public safety, and immigration policy that had become increasingly visible across parts of Europe. Critics saw something very different. They argued that the film compressed a complex issue into a story that could encourage viewers to associate the actions of a few offenders with much broader communities. They worried that emotionally powerful storytelling could reinforce existing fears rather than encourage careful understanding. These competing interpretations explain why reactions to the film have been so polarized. The movie became a mirror. People often saw in it what they already believed, and perhaps that is the most fascinating part of this story. Because Citizen Vigilante did not create Europe's immigration debate, it exposed just how divided public opinion had already become. Today, governments across Europe continue searching for answers. How can countries protect people fleeing war while maintaining secure borders? How can they remove individuals who commit serious crimes without undermining humanitarian commitments? How can integration succeed in rapidly changing societies? And how can these conversations take place without reducing complex human realities to simple political slogans? Those questions remain unresolved. But one thing is certain, movies have the power to entertain. Occasionally, they also have the power to ignite conversations that extend far beyond the screen. Whether you see Citizen Vigilante as a provocative work of fiction, a legitimate political commentary, or an unnecessarily divisive film, it has undeniably succeeded in forcing audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about immigration, security, justice, and freedom of expression. The challenge now is ensuring those conversations are guided by evidence rather than assumptions, by careful analysis rather than viral headlines, and by an understanding that complex issues rarely have simple answers. Because in an age of instant information, critical thinking may be our most valuable skill. And perhaps that is the real lesson of the Citizen Vigilante controversy. Not that everyone should agree, but that everyone should be willing to look beyond the headlines before reaching a conclusion. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deeply researched videos on geopolitics, technology, history, economics, and the stories shaping our world, make sure to subscribe to @ManishSirG. If this video gave you a new perspective, leave a like. It really helps the channel. And now it is your turn. Do you think Citizen Vigilante started a conversation that needed to happen? Or do you think it oversimplified one of Europe's most complex challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments, but keep the discussion respectful. The goal isn't to win an argument, it is to better understand the issue. Until next time, stay curious, question every narrative, follow the evidence, and never stop learning.